Do I have anterior pelvic tilt? First, I'm going to explain some of the myths and misconceptions around testing for anterior pelvic tilt, and then we're going to get into a very simple test that'll tell you whether or not you have anterior pelvic tilt. By the end of the video, you'll know whether or not you have anterior pelvic tilt and whether it's a big enough problem that you might want to work on. You may have heard about anterior pelvic tilt. A doctor or a chiropractor or physical therapist might have said you have it. Or maybe you just read about it on a Reddit thread and you're wondering like, do I have anterior pelvic tilt? The good news is there's a simple test you can do. It doesn't involve any expensive tools. It doesn't involve an X-ray, MRI, or CT scan. If you look around on the internet, you might have noticed that there are a lot of different ideas about how to test for anterior pelvic tilt. There are people who sell these weird devices and all kinds of things. There are people who claim that if you look at this bone and this piece of the bone and you draw the line and then draw this line and another line. The big problem with all these different tests that measure bones and bone angles and bony landmarks is that bone anatomy from person to person varies hugely. The two bony landmarks on the front of your pelvis called the anterior superior iliac spine, or the ASIS, may actually sit at different heights regardless of what the actual ilia, or the two elephant ears of your pelvis, are doing. And even if they were generally perfectly symmetrical, it's kind of hard to get an exact measurement of a bone's position just by putting fingers or devices on the skin, which can slip and slide over the bone. Now let's look at a simple test that you can do at home right now to see if you have anterior pelvic tilt in a form where you might need to work on it. Start by lying on the floor, face up with your knees bent and feet flat on the floor. You'll notice there should be a little gap between your low back and the floor right now. That's perfectly normal and natural. Depending on the size of your butt and your pelvis, you may have a bigger gap or a smaller gap. If you have very strong anterior pelvic tilt tendencies, you may feel like there's pressure in your low back, like the muscles in your low back are keeping an arch there, and you may feel like your belly kind of like juts out. Those would be signs that you might have anterior pelvic tilt. And if you feel like the gap is so huge you can drive a truck underneath it, then that's another sign that you might have anterior pelvic tilt that's intense enough that you need to work on it. That takes us to the next step. Now, squeeze your abs and your glutes. Contract them so that you can lower your lower back down to the floor and remove that gap. If it helps, you can imagine putting cookie dough under your low back and you're trying to smash that cookie dough to give yourself a nice, delicious cookie. Try to make that cookie as flat as possible. If you find that you cannot do this, you cannot squish that cookie, you cannot get your low back flat, that is a sign that you need to work on your pelvis control and you are stuck in anterior pelvic tilt. You should keep watching to the end of this video and make sure to click the link at the end that will give you free exclusive tips for fixing your anterior pelvic tilt. If you pass that portion of the test, then the next step is to just maintain that position for 30 seconds and see how it feels. If you start noticing that muscles in your lower back are kind of doing a weird spasming thing, or you just find that you can't even maintain that position for 30 seconds because you just generally feel weirdly, vaguely tired, then you have anterior pelvic tilt that you need to fix, and you should be sure to check out the free course. One thing to note about this test on the floor is if you have a very large butt, this won't be very accurate. In fact, short of doing an X-ray, which I don't recommend, you can't really see what's going on if there's a lot of fatty tissue that's obscuring the view of what's happening with the bones underneath. If that's the situation you're in, then I would just suggest overall fitness training, including stuff that would fix anterior pelvic tilt and improve your overall mobility. If you are able to maintain that position for 30 seconds and it's all good in the hood, then you can move on to the next step of the test. In a standing position, imagine you are a dog. You have a tail and you are scared of something. And you're trying to tuck your tail between your legs. Another way to think of this is to imagine you have a weight attached to the back of your pelvis or to a belt loop on your pants. That weight is pulling the back of your pelvis down towards the floor. This will flatten your lower back and put you into posterior pelvic tilt. If you can do this without your knees bending, and you can hold this for about 30 seconds, you're in decent shape and you probably don't have anterior pelvic tilt. That's a huge deal. If anything, your APT probably shows up when you're doing more active activities, and you probably just need to do a little bit more to strengthen your abs and make sure your hips are working well. But if you try to do this and your knees bend and you have to cheat in all kinds of weird ways and it feels totally awkward, then you really should be working on fixing your anterior pelvic tilt and learning how to control your pelvis. So how did you do with the tests? Did you pass both of them? If so, awesome. If you didn't pass, then make sure you check out the description box for helpful links, including a link to a free program that'll help you avoid doing the wrong exercises for anterior pelvic tilt. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon to get notifications. Share this video on Reddit and anywhere else you think people actually want real good information about anterior pelvic tilt. And as always, I hope you remember that pain sucks. Life shouldn't.